Okay, Jen, I don't know if you can hear me, but the feed is going live now. I've actually got you on mute, so um, but the feed is going live, so we should be good to go. All right, perfect. So the feed is actually live. I'm going to Nikki. There we go. Okay, perfect. So we are live. All right, thanks everybody for joining on. Nikki, I've actually, you're still on mute, but the feed is live. I'm just going to take a little bit of time to share the feed. If you want to double check your Facebook page just to make sure that the feed is on there.
Sure, will do.
And thanks everyone for logging on. If you are watching, just do me a favor and like and share the video. Let us know where you're checking in from. All right, perfect. All right, there we go. All right, so we will get started in just a few minutes. Just gonna get the feed out there. How's the weather?
Oh, you have it. Is it working decent?
Yes. Thank you.
This is extended. It's not working like this. Yeah, this floor. You got a chicken over this.
The virtual world. You can't quite stop regular life.
Oh yeah, right. Oh my gosh. It's always that way.
Yeah. Yep. All right. All right, so we should be getting started in just a couple of minutes, just finishing up with sharing the video. If you have any specific questions before we get started, go ahead and put them in the chat. Tonight we are speaking with another real estate expert, and she actually is an expert appraiser. So if you have any questions that you can think of before we get started that relate to real estate and real estate appraisals, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be watching the chat. And I'll try not to forget a group while I'm sharing the feed. It's Kansas, Cincinnati. Indianapolis. Okay. Were you able to see the feed on your profile?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I just want to double check. All right, Chicago. Okay. All right. So I think what I'll do is we can go ahead and get started, and I will just work to get a couple more shares in as we go along, but I think I've got enough out there that we can definitely get started. So all right, welcome everyone to another edition of Wealth Talk Tuesdays. Today is Tuesday, February 16th, 2021, and today we are sitting down with Ginna Currie, also known as Nikki Neal on Facebook. Ginna is actually a New York State licensed general appraiser, qualified to appraise residential and commercial properties since 2003. As a member of the Appraisal Institute, she sits on the Appraisal Institute's comprehensive exam panel where she helps write and grade exam questions. She also mentors other appraisers who are working toward obtaining their MAI designation with the Appraisal Institute. Ginna also owns her own appraisal business. She's a certified USPAP, is that USPAP instructor, owns investment properties in New York and Baltimore, and she has a Facebook group where she teaches others about the benefits of real estate investing. And a fun fact about Ginna is she actually does not have an Amazon account, but she enjoys buying properties online, sight unseen. So welcome to Wealth Talk Tuesdays, Ginna. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So do us a favor and just tell the people a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I think you summed it up nicely. I'm a New York State appraiser. I appraise properties from a single family home to a multi-family home to a large, industrial building, office buildings, land underwater. In addition, I help people with reading their assessments so that they can reduce their taxes.
Mm.
And for whatever reason, somebody may need an appraisal. That's what I'm here for, to help them with their needs for that appraisal. And then I teach.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's perfect. You actually, a couple things that you said, I'll circle back on. I think the land underwater was an interesting one too, because it's funny because when I always tell people about real estate, I always talk about how it encompasses everything. But one of the examples I never use is the land that's under the waters.
Yeah.
That's funny. All right. So tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you're located, little trajectory about kind of how you grew up and what life was like, and kind of how you got to the point of being an appraiser and a real estate investor. So what does that journey kind of look like for you?
I grew up in Long Island, Suffolk County, nice suburban area. My mother was in real estate, so I did go around with her and we saw houses, and I was always in awe with the houses that had the columns in the front, those big colonials. And I always liked also split level homes. I love a split level home, but I don't live in one. I wish I did. And I just always liked land, having land around. So because of hearing the stories my mother would tell about people in their houses and seeing what they had in the house, like, ooh, ah. And I stayed on Long Island most of my life. What my first house was a 2-family, which was great. Being an owner occupied 2-family home, the tenant paid for my rent, basically, my mortgage with their rent. And I was able to just live life and do everything. We traveled a lot, the ski trips, cruises, all sorts of stuff, all because somebody else was paying my mortgage, which turned out to be great. My husband's originally from Westchester County, New York.
Okay.
And he said, hey, let's move up to Westchester. And I'm like, what? No way. Because we always looked at Westchester as very exclusive, very expensive. And I finally agreed, moved off Long Island, moved to Westchester, and it's great. It's beautiful. The people are really nice. There's all this land, beautiful homes, much older homes, and even some newer ones. And I really like it. As for becoming an appraiser, because there was always, that love of real estate, I saw a listing one time for real estate appraisal. I was like, oh, I want to do that. But I didn't have the qualification. So I said, okay, how do I do that? And I found a school which was giving classes at the local college.
Okay.
I started taking the classes and they said, oh, well, this is for residential, but if you continue on, you can take commercial. I was like, oh, I'll take the commercial classes. And I took the commercial classes. And while I was sitting in one of the classes, it was like a boring newspaper class, there was someone else there, older gentleman, said, hey, you're from Long Island. Do you have a mentor? I'd like to mentor you. I was like, sure, yeah, let's do this. And I got so much exposure to so many different things. This gentleman actually specialized in appraising churches. So because he specialized with churches, a lot of the churches, they'll have a parsonage or a manse in which the clergyman would live in. So then I would be able to appraise a commercial piece of property and then also residential. And then he told me, oh, that's nice, you took classes, but I need for you to go to the Appraisal Institute. They're the premier educational institute around. You need to go to the Appraisal Institute and take your classes all over. I was like, oh,
and take them
I
all
had to
over.
spend money all over again. Take the classes, and it really was. It's great. And that's where I've learned so much about appraising, networking with so many different people all over the country, even outside of the country. I met people from Guam and everywhere. And the rest is basically history. I've just been doing it ever since.
Okay, no, that was a lot of good information. So it's interesting because I don't always have people who I guess can say are second generation or more real estate professionals. So you were unique in the fashion that your mom worked in real estate. So was she a realtor? Was she a lender, or what was your mom's profession within real
She was
estate?
just plain old real estate agent, but what she did was she found out that there was like a niche in our neighborhood, because where we lived, blacks lived on one side, whites on the other. There was no one that was in that market. There was no realtor specific for our area where I grew up, and she just took over it, and it was great. She was really doing well, and I remember one year her telling me that in December, every single week, all the way, up in December, she had a closing. And by the time I got to the end of the year, she was up to like 2 within the week or something like that. So it was great.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that kind of really, piqued my interest.
Yeah. That's interesting. So if your mom wasn't in real estate and you didn't kind of get interested in real estate, what do you think you would have done otherwise in terms of a profession?
Oh my gosh. Um,
So everything worked.
I went to school for sociology, and I was going for my master's in social work. But I found out people didn't want you in their house. I'm taking away people's kids. They didn't want
Oh
me there.
yeah.
But as an appraiser, people want me in their house. So it was great. It's great. That's probably what I would have been. I would have been a social worker. I would have continued on.
Okay. Yeah, that's yeah, definitely two two sides of the coin.
Yeah.
But that's cool. So you had mentioned one of the things you had mentioned is you help people with assessments. And actually, I just want to acknowledge we have a couple people that had chimed in, and we did have one question, and we can come back to this. But how should African Americans avoid? It's funny because we had actually talked about this earlier. Not funny, but we had actually talked about this earlier. How should African Americans avoid discrimination in the appraisal process? I've heard that this is an issue. I've also heard we shouldn't leave pictures out or anything that indicates ethnicity, which is actually something you had mentioned earlier, Ginna. So we'll definitely circle back on that question. And then if anyone has any other questions, definitely put them in the comments. I'm watching the comments, so I will certainly be sure to ask her, but we will circle back around on that question. So moving on from just the background in real estate, your mom working in real estate, and you kind of finding a love for real estate and finding your journey in real estate through appraising. One thing you had mentioned, and we may bounce around a little bit, but one thing you had mentioned is you help people with assessments, and this isn't something that I've talked a lot about, and it's something that I don't think a lot of people are openly familiar with. But can you talk a little bit about what you meant when you said that you help people with assessments, and maybe just talk a little bit about what assessments are, kind of what they're typically, what purpose they typically serve, and then kind of how you work with people to deal with assessments on that they incur with their properties.
Sure. An assessment is basically a percentage of the market value of your house. And the municipality uses the taxes to pay for all of the schools and the roads and everything else that they provide to the residents. So what happens is the taxes are based upon a tax rate. When you take the tax rate and you multiply by the assessment, which is a portion of the market value of your house, that now tells you what your taxes are. What happens is that because there's a need, there may be, a new hospital or roads or whatever, what the municipality does is they will change the equalization rate of all of the properties within the municipality, which will actually change your fair market value of your property, and then increase the tax rate, and now your taxes go up. So what people do, homeowners do, is they grieve the assessment, because if you see in your neighborhood that values are going down, but your taxes are going up, there's a real disconnect there. So what the homeowner needs to do is speak with their assessor, be it on the town or the county level, call them up, ask them what's going on, why is my assessment so high? They will probably guide you to the assessment roll that is online. You would look at that. It's usually done by a section block and lot, which is the legal address. It can actually be done by the physical address of your property. Look at what your neighbors' assessments are, because their houses are probably similar to yours, square footage wise. In addition, find out what houses are actually selling for in the market. If houses, the values and the prices are going down, then your taxes should go down, your assessment should go down. And once you reduce the assessment and then you apply that tax rate to the assessed value, your taxes go down. So you really have to have a good handle of what is happening in your community. Some communities, what they're doing now, they're at 100% assessment. So the value of your property is at 100%. So if you support your house for $1 million, the municipality says the value is $1 million, and we're going to tax you specifically at $1 million. What has happened on Long Island is it was a little bit of a unequal assessment, where some neighborhoods, some homes, they were assessed at beyond the market value, and that happened to have been though in the poorer areas. But then on the Gold Coast of Long Island, on the North Shore, those houses were actually assessed at a much lower percentage of their full market value. So then they had to do a county-wide reassessment so that everybody was on an even keel. But still, a lot of times, even when there is the county-wide reassessment, some of the houses end up being assessed improperly.
And that's where you come in to be able to help people objectify or quantify the market value of their property. It's interesting that you had mentioned that you have different assessment values, or you could have different assessment values that tend to be higher than market value, and it happens just so happens to be in a certain area of town or in a certain neighborhood. That's all good information. One of the things I was going to mention, and me and my wife were actually talking about this earlier, because we drove by a neighborhood we were thinking about buying in before we bought our house a while back, and it's a town, one of the towns or cities within the county. So the actual city itself has a special assessment that they put on top of the county's assessment. And those, sometimes you have these special assessments that, as you mentioned, pay for certain projects and things like that, or you may have a special assessment that pays for the particular I want to say city. It may be a city or it may be a township or something like that, but there could be additional layers of assessments that exist on your property. And then in terms of the market value or the assessment value, there there tends to be different values that are associated with the property, right? You may have the assessed value, which is supposedly based on market value, but as we heard just a few minutes ago, it may not be according to actual market value. You also may have a value where, let's say you want to list your house for sale and you get a broker opinion of value and what they think the house could sell for. That value could be totally different from what the assessed value of the property is. And then let's say you're going to go and get a home equity line of credit or something, and that value could be totally different. So there are a lot of different values that could be associated with your property in particular. But it's good to monitor the assessed value. And I know one thing with the assessed value, like in our county, they reassess every three years. But when the assessor comes out, you have no idea when the assessor comes out to even assess your property. It's not a very thorough assessment, right? They might walk your property line, or they may just drive by and then they slap a value on your property. And one of the examples you gave is, hey, the assessed value might not be according to market value, like it may be under, but your taxes are going up. Well, another situation could be your property condition may not may not be in line with what the assessed value is, and that may be another opportunity for you to have that assessed value lower because of the property condition, right?
Oh, yes. So you would have a physical issue with the house. You can also have externalities where you may be up against a major highway. You may be near a landfill. You may be near a budding commercial property. Double yellow lines on a street really means that that's a busy street. So you should not be paying the same amount and be assessed as somebody's on a nice, quiet, dead-end residential street. You could also happen to have, if you're near the train station, all that noise, all of that comes into play. So you have external factors, and then you also happen to have the market condition factors, the physical factors within your house.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And this is also something that commercial properties can do as well, right? This is not
yes,
just
every year. It depends upon where you live. So in the state of New York, we're not too bad. You can go every year. You can actually do your taxes, and if you win, you win. If you don't, no problem. State of New Jersey, they have what's called direct assessments. The assessor can actually say, "Oh, we didn't know that you had a jacuzzi in your house. You know what? I'm going to bump that assessment up even higher now that you told us this." So what happens in Jersey is you really need to be nice to your neighbors, because your neighbors can rat you out. They can call the assessor and say, "Look, my neighbor over here, they have an in-ground pool. They've got the spa going on. They got a sauna. They've got all this stuff. You need to come out here and check it out." And that does happen actually in Jersey.
Yeah. Oh man, those neighbors, man, I tell you, that's funny. So we've got direct assessments. One of the comments we had was the mention of drive-by assessments, which I kind of touched on. The appraiser just literally driving by and they're not even hopping out to really do any work. But that's good information. There's actually I know there are companies, at least in the commercial space. I don't know about as much in the residential space, but I know there are companies that specialize in helping commercial properties fight that assessment, because especially on a commercial level, you can imagine that those tax bills can change significantly if the property values are changing. Yes. But let's move on from assessments. I think that was good. One of the things you had mentioned is land underwater. So, and this is a random question, but what it makes me think about is, I believe it's riparian rights.
Yes.
And people may not know about is it riparian or riparian?
Riparian rights. That's where if your land abuts a river, and so you've got people that are doing that whitewater rafting down the river and everything, and then what happens is, when the river ebbs and flows, it may add some land to your property, or it may actually take some away. There's also littoral rights, which happens to be if you're against a lake or a pond. So you have different rights there. Land underwater, if you think about when you look at the lot line of a property, it will actually go to the middle of the street sometimes, or the middle of the water. You're actually own that land, but you may actually own that land underneath there. Within New York City, there are some areas like Staten Island where the lot line goes under the water, and the people are actually taxed on this. It's usually around, the commercial areas. It might be, let's say, a marina, because they're actually having the boats over there where the pier is, but they're taxed for that.
Okay, yeah, so that's more of a specialized, depending on where your property is located.
Yes.
Yeah, and as far as property rights too, you also have basically the rights that are above the property itself, like you have your air rights, and then also your rights go down, if I remember correctly, down to the core of the earth. not
Yes.
not that you're gonna be digging 3,000 feet underneath your property, but technically your rights literally go as far as your lot line. I believe it's down to the core of the earth.
Yes.
which is
Yes,
interesting.
those
But
with your subsurface, your
yeah,
subterranean rights. You will get that when you have mineral rights, because there's a lot of fracking going on. There may be coal mining, there may be oil, but there is subterranean rights. Then there is your surface rights. And then you have where your superstructure or whatever improvement you have on there. And then there are the air rights also.
which is not as prevalent here in America, but I've been one of the development, I guess you could say, development ideas that I follow is something that they actually do in London quite a bit. And instead of at least in DC, because we're constricted on land and we have these height restrictions. Well, not just in DC, I mean, along the East Coast, but when we're adding square footage, and we're going straight up. We're not,
Yes.
you may go back, but a lot of the lots just aren't big enough. So instead of going back, you're going straight up. Well, in London, they're going below ground. And so they may dig a basement that is 2, 3, or 4 stories underground. And this is how not wealthy people, rich people, the people who have the money, because it's not cheap, but because the cost of property and the cost of land is so expensive in London, it's cheaper for them to build out these basements that are 2, 3, and 4 stories deep, and that's how they increase the square footage and the living space where they are, instead of trying to find somewhere else to live and getting priced out of neighborhoods and things like that. But yes, I found that
Interesting. I like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I found that to be interesting. I heard about that a couple years ago, and I always found that to be interesting. So let's circle back. So to become a real estate appraiser, what is you mentioned the process of going through education. So there's an education component, there's a licensing component. How much time are we talking about in terms of the education piece? Because, for example, like with real estate, right? Getting a real estate license is pretty easy. You have to sit for, at least in this area, you have to sit for 60 hours, and you can get that 60 hours done within a span of 2 or 3 weeks if you do it full time. And then you can take your state licensing, your state and federal level or national level licensing. And so within a month's time, you can actually be licensed as a real estate agent. And then to become a real estate broker, there are additional hours that you have to take. But still, even those hours can be completed within 4 to 6 weeks. So how much time are we talking in terms of becoming an appraiser? And then what does that cost look like?
Okay, to begin with is the first 75 hours to become an appraiser trainee. You have basic principles, basic procedures, a supervisory trainee class, and then there is the National Uniform Professional Standards of Appraisal Practice, which is USPAP. That's 75 hours, and you can become a trainee. No test is needed, just pay your money for that.
Okay.
You continue on with your classes, or if you don't want to continue on your classes, you would then start working under someone else. As an apprentice, you would have a mentor to work under. You would have to keep a log. Then, after no less than 12 months and 1,000 hours of appraising, you can then sit for the exam.
Okay.
and it's a national exam that they have now.
Okay. And
So it can take about a year and a half, probably to really expedite everything. You can probably do everything in a year and a half. Nice.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. And it's, I like the fact that they have, it's easy. Well, I won't say easy because you still have to get through the content in the class, but at least to become a trainee, you can get to the trainee portion, but to become qualified and to become at least fully qualified on a base layer, you still have to go through at least 12 months and or 1,000 hours of actual training and actual on the job experience. And then not only that, you have to be an apprentice, right? You
Yes.
have to be under a licensed appraiser. So
Yes.
that's good as well. And then just that estimate, what kind of cost are we talking about for that course? And then also during that training period when you're an apprentice, is that, I'm assuming that's paid? How does that makeup look? Is it typically as a job or an independent contractor? What does that kind of look like?
Classes, you could probably get all of your classes like a package deal for about $2,000. And as an apprentice, you know, you can work at some of these larger firms and make a decent salary. You don't have to have a college degree for just, let's say, a licensed apprentice. If you're going to be a certified licensed appraiser, then you definitely need a college degree. But just for the license part, you don't. Salary wise, I don't know, but I do know people that are working for major commercial firms just as a trainee. So they're making decent money.
Okay.
Enough to live off of in New York City, let's put it that way. They're doing okay.
So the bottom line is, though, there's opportunity, and that's actually the next question I was going to ask. Just from a general standpoint, the appraisal industry as a career option, I'd say, is it a growing industry? I'm assuming it's growing, but what kind of opportunities, or how would you describe the opportunities within the appraisal field? Are they welcoming new appraisers? Do they need new appraisers? Kind of, what does that look like?
This pandemic has been wonderful for appraising. We are so very, very busy. Appraising really works when there is growth in America and when there's a lot of decline. So whenever you have a recession, depression, or a lot of growth, appraising is wonderful. When everything, the supply and demand is at equilibrium, it's pretty dead. What had happened was, prior to the Great Recession, there was a lot of unscrupulous people. And so they made the standards a little bit harder. They made it where you had to have a college degree just to be a licensed appraiser. And it was like, oh, we can't enter this. But the fees weren't that great. So people weren't graduating college and becoming an appraiser. Then you had a lot of older appraisers. I think the average age of an appraiser is like 50.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's up there.
Yeah.
And so then, because it's the public trust, we're out there and the public really has to rely upon us. And we're the face of, the bank, the whole industry, that we're not taking money, we're not being unethical or anything. So what ends up happening is so many people retired and not enough people coming into the industry. So then they lowered the standards. So now you can just become an appraiser license without a college degree. There are plenty of options. It does take a little bit of while to do it, as you just mentioned. To be a real estate agent, wow, within a month, couple of months, I got my license, I can hang out the shingle, I'm under somebody's brokerage, I can do this. With appraising, it takes a little bit longer, but with appraising, there are so many different avenues you can go down. As I mentioned some of the others. You could do this to the day you die, like desktop appraisals. You never have to leave your office ever. So there are plenty of opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as I'm thinking about it, one of the things about appraising, it is an extremely, extremely important component to, if it's a buying and selling transaction or it's a refinancing transaction, either way, it's extremely important because you are verifying a price point that both parties are relying on, right? Whether that's the buyer and the seller, or whether that's the borrower and the lender, they are really relying on your estimation and basically verification and validation of what a piece of property is worth. And that
Yes,
impacts, like I said, it impacts the buyer and the seller, it impacts the borrower and the lender. It also impacts the city government or the county government and the amount of revenue that they're able to bring in. So that appraisal component is really important. And that's also kind of how I think you had mentioned just some of the challenges that the market went through, and with with because if you have a situation where properties are being valued correctly, and let's say they're being overinflated, then that obviously can lead to some problems. But I think that's that's it's good that it's good that you have appraisers and you have appraisals. It definitely is a critical part of the finance and transaction. So with that being said, that's a good segue into what our first question was. Now, can you talk a little bit about, because people watching, we have a lot of people watching, some people who are experienced in real estate, some people who are investors, some people, who own their own home. And then you also have people who have never bought property before. So can you just con- give us a quick overview of where the appraisal transaction comes, or the appraiser comes into place during a transaction? For example, if we're buying a property.
okay, after the buyer goes to their lender and says, this is the piece of property I want to buy, here's the contract of sale, the lender then looks to a mortgage broker where they maybe can get the appraiser, or they use what is called an AMC, appraisal management company, which is a third party, and they will have a list on their panel of appraisers that they use. And then the appraiser goes out and inspects the property, looks at all comparable properties, and then comes up with an opinion of value for that subject property.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably, people always say, like the longest part of it, because it takes about, I can appraise a property, go in there, do the inspection, send off the report with about 48 hours, but then the bank still has to get the report. They have to approve it also.
Mm-hmm.
So it's many layers of people that are looking at this report.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's always the report that you're kind of, everybody's waiting to see how did the appraisal come back, right? Because
Yes,
the
yes.
entire transaction is for a large part dependent on this appraisal. And then if the appraisal doesn't come back, then there's some renegotiating that has to take place, and trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with this contract price? But everybody's always waiting to see, okay, how's the appraisal going to come back? But that's a good segue into our question, where the question was, how should African Americans avoid discrimination in the appraisal process? And the statement was, I've heard that this is an issue. I've also heard we shouldn't leave pictures out or anything that indicates ethnicity. So can you talk a little bit about the potential for discrimination, and what you may have heard or seen or experienced in the industry, and any advice for what people can do to ensure they get a fair appraisal?
I personally am not going to discriminate against somebody that has, something, pictures or anything else like that of their lovely family in there. But because we all have biases, there may be a bias with an appraiser who will question, how do you live here? How did you afford this house? How can you afford this house? I'll give you a quick one. When I was purchasing my house where I am in New Rochelle, the appraiser knew I was an appraiser. I made it really blatant. I was like, I'm an appraiser, just so that you know.
Yeah.
And she came back, she goes, what are you gonna do with the property, with the lawn? I said, I'm gonna cut it. What do you think I'm gonna do? Put a koi pond in there? What kind of question is that? And then because she goes, well, I live in, it was Pelham, which is a very affluent area. She was like, oh, well, it cost me so much money to get it painted. I said, well, I have a hookup. I know somebody who can paint my house. So I'm sure she was questioning, like, how were we able to afford this property or get it so cheap? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
What I would suggest to people is, yes, remove anything that could possibly exhibit any way, shape, or form that you are Black, Chinese, or anything else.
Mhm.
When I purchase a house, on the back form there, when they ask about race, I never fill it in, never.
Mm.
I've been lucky enough that Google has me down as Caucasian. I'm like, yes, I can now buy all the houses in America. But also I would do that so that the appraiser can really see everything also.
Mhm.
Our main concern is floors, walls, and ceilings.
Mhm.
So sometimes people put up a poster or a picture because they're hiding, the hole in the wall,
Mm.
believe it or not.
Mhm.
But because of today's society, the way people are, their biases, I would remove it.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, it is true. I definitely would. It's something sad that you wouldn't want to do, but
Mhm.
yes, I do agree with it to
Mhm.
do that.
No, it's a good response. And just acknowledge we had someone say good evening, Angie. Thanks for logging on and watching. So as far as a fair appraisal, and this is something that I've done over the years, and that I heard you should do when it comes to an appraiser, and going through the appraisal process. And I don't know how effective it is because as a realtor, as a real estate broker, as you're placing the transaction in a buying and selling transaction, there's no interaction with there shouldn't be any interaction with the appraiser. So one of the things I always heard throughout the industry is, leave a pack of recent sales comps that you think, apply to the property, or any relevant information about the property. Leave a package for the appraiser just as a extra added, I guess, source of information, assuming that they don't have access to the same information, right? But leave some type of packet with sales comps so that they could have additional information to complete their appraisal. Is that relevant at all from your perspective? Is that something that you've seen agents do? And how do you take that information into consideration, or are you you're fully doing your thing, and you're not, trying to, or you're not taking any of the information from the agent who's trying to influence that value?
No, I do my due diligence ahead of time. So by the time I get into that property, I try to know as much as possible about it. I've already pulled my comparables, but the agent may know something about that property that's not showing up on MLS.
Mm.
So it is great that they do that. Also, especially when it comes to condos and co-ops, a lot of times that's not even out there for the public to see it. It doesn't even make it to the local MLS because somebody within the building buys it, or somebody knows someone else who else buys it. So I wouldn't. I always tell the story about I appraised a house. It was a little tiny little 2-bedroom house in the Bronx, little ranch, and I always ask at the end, did I see everything? Even though I know I saw everything, I said, did I miss anything?
Mm-hmm.
And the woman said, oh, this is a smart house. I said, really, it is? She said, yeah. She whipped out her phone. She started turning on lights, changing the temperature, locking the doors. And this was back in 2016, before people were really doing it. I turned to the realtor and I said, did you know this? He's like, no, I didn't. I was like, oh, because the woman told me it was a smart house, and that really put it over the limit, and I was able to bring it in at value, and I was able to make sure that you had a happy buyer, happy seller, everything was fine. But that realtor, he wasn't even prepared. So yes, to anyone who's a real estate agent, if you can find homes that are similar, same zip codes, school district, square footage, please send it out there in a package for the appraiser, because they may not have seen it. Unfortunately, that may happen. They
No,
haven't seen it.
that's a great response, you brought up a couple of points that I just want to kind of circle back on. So when I mentioned, it's pretty easy to get your real estate license, that definitely shows throughout the industry. And if anyone's watching this, and let's say, at some point you're planning to sell a house, a couple things that you want to double check the listing once your listing goes live, because as you mentioned, the MLS may not have a lot of information, or may not have all of the information. And one of the reasons, the primary reason the MLS doesn't have all of the information, is because the agent didn't put all of the information in there. A lot of times agents do not want to go through the and I say tedious, but it's not tedious because you have all of these options that you can click, as you're going through the pages of listing this property on an MLS. But a lot of times they're not putting all of the property information in the MLS. And that's where you as an appraiser are looking to pull your information on this particular property, or in the case of if you're pulling comps. So check your listing and make sure that the listing has all of the information in there. And one thing that is a good indicator is, well, did the agent put you through a questionnaire or type of interview process to ask you about the property and to ascertain all of the things that you may have done to the property since you've owned it, the work that you've done, in this case that you had mentioned, the electronics and bringing it up to the status of being a smart home. So you definitely want to make sure that you check the listing information. And a lot of times agents won't even, and it's funny because I talked to someone a couple weeks ago, and they thought that their house was on market, and the house hasn't been on market in 8 months, and they had no idea. Yeah, can you believe that? Can you believe that? But that's a whole nother story. So anyway, a lot of time, I won't say a lot of times, but there are times where agents, they won't even put a picture up of your property. So when people are looking at your property on Zillow and Redfin and in the MLS, there's no picture associated with your property. And then sometimes the quality of the picture and the type of picture that they put up is poor. So they're not doing they're not doing your listing justice, and they're not providing an adequate level of marketing for your property. So that's definitely not every agent. A vast majority of agents do a pretty good job, but you definitely just want to check that information once your listing goes live. And that's also something that you can ask the agent up front when you're going through the interview process of looking for a new agent or looking for a new broker. And then the second piece to that, you essentially validated that yes, it is a good idea for the realtor to provide information about the property or other property sales that they may be familiar with that never hit the MLS. It may be an off-market transaction, or it may be a transaction that was listed in the MLS, and sometimes those transactions aren't closed out in the MLS, and instead of the property being listed as sold, it's just shown as withdrawn or temporarily off market or something like that. So ask your agent or encourage your agent to say, hey, are we supplying all of the information that we could be supplying during this appraisal process? Because again, your transaction is dependent upon that appraisal, which kind of leads me to a couple other questions on the flip side. Now, ideally we get a fair appraisal, right? And during the purchase process, and especially during, let's say, the refinance or the home equity process where we're trying to take money or gain access to money, let's say there's a situation where we feel we don't get a fair appraisal, or the appraisal amount that we get doesn't represent the market value that we think the property should carry. What are some options and what are some recommendations we can do in that situation and then under those circumstances?
The first thing, you go back to the bank and tell them this is wrong. Because you don't have access to the appraiser, you're going to then show them the comparables, be it from MLS or wherever you find them from, of properties that have actually sold. In addition, if this appraiser is associated with any appraisal industry organization, it could be the Appraisal Institute, it could be ASA or some of the others, go to those organizations and say, you have this guy or lady on your account here, they're a member and they don't even know what the heck they're doing. So they can be sanctioned that way. And I'm really big on going to the state Department of State of Licensing Services and putting in a complaint about the appraiser. Mm-hmm. In addition, there's also the Appraisal Foundation. They have an 800 number. You can also do it. So those are the options. First, go to the bank, then find out if this appraiser is associated with any organization so they can be sanctioned that way. There's the Appraisal Foundation, and then there is your State Department of Licensing Services.
Okay, and that's great, and you kind of do it in the fashion of what the circumstances are. But first, you're going to go to the bank, and then depending on what the circumstances are and the severity of it, then you kind of elevate it to those various levels. Okay, great. One question or one comment, maybe more so as it relates to maybe not getting a fair appraisal or having difficulty with the appraisals. I don't know if this is something that you've seen or you may have a perspective on, but one of the challenges I know sometimes is that the appraiser is not from the area and doesn't really know and isn't familiar with the area. So for example, it's like, so for example, there may be an appraiser who comes up from Richmond, Virginia to appraise a property in Washington, D.C., and Richmond, Virginia is 2.5, 3 hours south. You know, it's a totally different market, totally different environment. But then they're traveling up to the city, which is an urban versus rural, and all these different nuances, and they're appraising a property. And so that unfamiliarity with the market could present a challenge when it comes to them appraising a property. So is that something that that you've seen in the industry, and any additional recommendations on how to handle or potentially handle that situation?
That's called geographical competency. If you're not competent in that area, so competency, you can gain it different ways. Either you're going to team up with another appraiser and they're going to tell you about the market, or you're going to do all your due diligence and find it out. But if you're traveling 2.5 miles, you're really desperate for that money. You should not be going out that far for a job at all.
Okay. Okay.
So
Geographical
that's
competency.
being competent. It's competency. And that's one of the things that as appraisers we have to have is competency.
Okay. Okay, perfect. All right, let's see. 7:52. So let's talk about this one. We didn't get to your fun fact. And I find this interesting given that, you know, the pandemic has pretty much turned everybody into an Amazon customer if they weren't one before. So how is it and why is it you don't have an Amazon account?
Okay, how is it that I don't have an Amazon account? I don't shop on Amazon. I don't buy things online. I like to go into the store, feel it, touch it, try it on, all of that. I have to. I'm very touchy-feely, tangible. It has to be tangible. And it keeps people having a job. That's why I don't go to the self-service, you know, for my groceries. I go right there to the cashier. I stand in line.
Okay, that's fair enough. And I believe if you have made it through this pandemic without shopping on Amazon, I think you're good to go. Like I have no doubt that you will be able to to maintain that at least until they pretty much no longer sell things in person. But that's cool. So on the flip side of that fun fact, you don't have an Amazon account and you don't buy things online, except you have bought property online sight unseen. So tell us a
Yes.
little bit about that.
When I first started looking in Baltimore, we did have a realtor that we were working with, but that agency had this separate agreement that I was supposed to pay them like 5% on top of everything else. And I'm like, huh? What? So I was like, no, I have to be able to find a house without having to pay so much money. I was like, I can do this. I'm an appraiser. So I went online and I Googled how buy a house online. And it came up auction.com and I saw auction. I was like, oh, wow. And then I started going deeper and deeper and finding all these different auction sites. And then I started bidding on them and winning. I was like, oh, this is great. But I will do, I do have boots on the ground. So I call that same realtor and I'd have him drive the area, look at the property, send me pictures. If I happen to be going down to Maryland, then we'll drive the area also. So we can see what's happening there. So I may not have seen it, but I do all my due diligence in advance, looking at property condition reports, having someone else drive the area, look what's going on.
No, that's good, and that's good advice for, excuse me, that's good advice for just kind of giving people a window into what it's like investing out of state. All right, having boots on the ground, you still have a lot of resources, a lot of data, a lot of information that you can utilize to help you ascertain whether this is a good investment or not. People who can help you with driving by the property, can drive the neighborhood and things like that. And this is actually you actually bought in Baltimore. So a lot of people, myself included, I've actually been looking at Baltimore quite a bit. But in your experience so far, you like the Baltimore market, and have you had any issues, or so far so good?
So far, so good. When you call the municipality, the city is very, very helpful. They
Mm,
do have this one little quirk where you have to have a municipal lien certificate because they just want to make sure that all the utilities are paid for before they do a transfer of ownership,
mhm,
which may take like about a week though. But
mhm,
other than that, which my title company didn't know about at first, but I
mhm,
schooled them on that one. They've been extremely helpful. I would send down a FedEx envelope and say, hey, just use my FedEx and just, send this search back.
mhm,
The people are really nice. I walked around the neighborhood and I'd ask people, hey, how much do you pay for rent here? So I could get an idea of what the
mhm,
rents are in the area. And
mhm.
people would be honest, like, oh yeah, I pay $750. I'm like, thank you.
Yep, yeah.
Yeah. So
Doing a little rent comp
yeah, my
analysis.
own little rental
Yeah,
survey.
yeah,
Yes, I
yeah,
have
yeah.
to.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that municipal lien certificate. That is actually, it may be seem a little cumbersome, but that's actually great. It's funny. I had saw on one of the groups I'm connected with. This was just a couple days ago. Someone bought a property. Well, they wholesale the property, and they wholesale the property to their investor. The investor closed on the property and went to try and turn on the water, and there was a $4,000 water bill, and the water company was refusing to change the account over because of this past due bill. And normally, at least the title companies I've dealt with, and I think it's different by jurisdiction what they verify, or different by state what they verify and what they don't verify. But typically that's not an issue. But I think what happened is the water company didn't put a lien against the property. They just had this outstanding bill at $4,000. So now the person was trying to get help to figure out, like, what do I do about this, and am I responsible as a wholesaler for paying this back due water bill? But the municipal lien certificate sounds like that eliminates the possibility for
Yes.
that, because it ensures that all of the utilities are paid for prior to transfer. I think that's a great idea.
Yes, where there are some municipalities right here in New York, the city of Yonkers, you can transfer a property with all those outstanding taxes.
Mm,
And if they don't pay it at closing, then you, the new homeowner, are stuck with it. Where I live in New Rochelle, they don't do that. There's literally an outstanding, probably like $4,000 from the prior homeowner, because when
mm,
they sent the check in, it bounced. I said,
mm,
well, I didn't live there, but if I lived in Yonkers, they would have been like, too bad, you owe it. So you have to really, I always suggest to people to call the taxing authority, call the
mm.
assessor, speak with them, find out if everything's on the up and up and the legality of each property.
That's great advice. That's great advice. I think we'll end on that note. So if you are buying property, make sure during the closing process you verify that all the utilities have been paid up to date. Make sure that the property taxes are paid and up to date, and if they aren't, that they are being paid out of the transaction proceeds on your settlement statement, so you aren't surprised with any unexpected tax bills or utility bills that will prevent you from executing your investment strategy.
Yeah,
So it is 7:59. I appreciate you, Ginna, for hopping on and giving
thanks.
us a lot of great information. It was a great conversation. I definitely learned a lot. And if anyone has any questions, or they are interested in becoming an appraiser, or even interested in joining your Facebook group, I didn't mention that you have a private Facebook group or a public Facebook group where you also educate, because you do educate. You also teach real estate stuff. So how can people reach you, and what's the name of your Facebook group if people want to log on to the Facebook group?
Oh, on Facebook, it's Black Real Estate Investors and Appraisers. Yeah,
Oh,
Black Real Estate Investors and Appraisers. And the and is an ampersand. It's not spelled out A&D. It's the ampersand symbol instead.
okay, perfect. Black real estate appraisers and investors.
No,
And
investors and appraisers.
of investors and appraisers. All right,
Yes.
I was going to type it in the I was going to type it in the comment, but I was getting distracted. So definitely connect with her on Facebook, and and just, you know, ask any questions or just get connected. And I know she's been online teaching quite a bit, so you can catch her online educating and giving a lot of good information, a lot of great value. So thanks again, Jenna, for joining us. I
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Thanks for
Thanks.
having me.
Hey, no
Wow.
problem. No
Great.
problem. Look
Bye-bye.
forward to working with you again soon. Take care.
Yes, take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.